All right. So this is your next fantasy chat, and for this one, I have brought on the wonderful Ideas of Ice and Fire, channel that has been calling the downfall of Game of Thrones, I think, way longer than many others. I've gone back through your catalog, and it's interesting seeing a lot of the concerns you raised back in, I want to say, even as early as late 2017, coming to be fully realized with this ending. But we'll go ahead and jump into that in a minute. But thank you so much for joining today for another fantasy chat.
No problem. I'm super excited to talk about some fantasy stuff. I'm super excited to talk about some fantasy stuff that's not related to Game of Thrones because I'm working on several things on my channel right now. But yeah, it's been mainly Game of Thrones since the season that's been airing.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Well, I mean, we all, as YouTube creators, we have to follow the waves. That's just the way it goes. But I do need to start with a little bit of Game of Thrones talk, just to get this out of the way. So there was one quote from your actual recent live stream that I went back and watched that stuck out to me, and I feel like there's a little more simmering under the surface here that we could talk about. And that was with your comments on the way the show ended. You said, "The more I think about it, the madder I am getting." Do you mind elaborating on that just a little bit?
Well, it's as I read more things on the internet and as I go back and watch some of the episodes and watch some of the scenes, it becomes more and more apparent to me how much they just didn't care and how much they really just wanted to rush it just to finish it, just so they could move on to other things. And one of my main issues with David and Dan was like they have the ability to say, okay, we are going to leave the show, but we're going to leave it in capable hands. Someone that has the time to really think about this and to really write it and tell it in an interesting way and do something that can subvert our expectations and do it in an intelligent manner. Because they keep bringing up subverting expectations, but I'm not subverted because I've been pleasantly led to like some great twist. I'm subverted because it's so stupid and I just can't stand how stupid it is. But yeah.
It's, for me, the thing that stands out the most is how the characters went from these incredibly complex, nuanced, some of the best the genre's ever seen, to just these, I want to say, almost caricatures of them previous selves, just shallow on that level. You had a wonderful video going into comparing book Aaron, I can never say his name right. Euron, thank you. Versus how he was represented in the show. I recommend people check it out. But to me, that kind of just epitomized the dumbing down of characters, not only to not just for budgetary and time saving sake, but to me it felt almost I guess the way you're putting it is, we just don't care. We're going to make this as easy as possible. We're going to turn someone who was this intimidating mythical figure to, I think the way you put it was dumb frat boy kind of vibe. Yeah. I'm sorry?
No, I was just saying, basically dumb frat boy.
Cool. Well, thank you for making those videos. I've really appreciated them. And it was really nice meeting you at Jordan Con. Is actually, we were on a panel together with Brent Weeks, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
On Epic Fantasy.
Yeah, when fantasy was epic. It involved talking about killing dogs at a couple points. That was interesting.
I love doing Game of Thrones for some reason.
But moving on in off of Game of Thrones, this is what I want to talk about. And I'm sure you've had enough Game of Thrones talk recently, but the flood of adaptations that's coming down the road. There are an insane number. I've written down just some of the biggest names here. We have Witcher, Kingkiller, His Dark Materials, Chronicles of Narnia again, more King Arthur, more Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, Conan, Dune, etc., etc. That's only scratching the surface. Are there any that you are optimistic for at this point, or are you kind of burnt out, or do you think maybe it's oversaturated, none of them can succeed? What's your feeling going in at this point?
I'm more optimistic about Dune because I love the Dune series. And I also love Denis Villeneuve. I really trust him as a director and as just a screenwriter. And I've seen the team that he's gathered together to produce this film, and I just think he's got a lot of really good people together. I hope the studio doesn't get too involved and they really let him do his vision, because I know he's really passionate about that book. I can see the early seeds of them kind of doing more Hollywood things, like they've cast Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho, which is, I have some contentions with that because I don't really feel like that actor matches the character. And there's a few other things like that, like Zendaya as Chani. I'm questioning whether or not she could pull off that role. But I'm very excited about Dune. Also, the Lord of the Rings series on Amazon. I'm interested to see what they're going to do. The Wheel of Time, obviously, of course, but I don't know if they're going to be able to do that well, because everything that I've seen where someone has tried to do something with the Wheel of Time has just been so bad But since we do have a Game of Thrones and we do have those first couple of seasons where we see that you really can tell this kind of more complicated story if you really try with all these different characters, if you really try. So that one's definitely up on my list really high. But yeah, we'll
Okay.
see.
See, for me, I was not excited for Lord of the Rings, and this might sound shallow, but then I saw the budget they gave it, and it's just a fact that money does buy quality to an extent.
Mhm.
And I know at least visually it'll look great. I don't know anything beyond that, but if you have that fat a budget, you're gonna look good at least.
For sure. And I could be mistaken about this, but I believe that Brian Cogman from Game of Thrones is coming over to work on the Lord of the Rings series.
Yeah, yeah. I actually
And
just I just read about that.
yeah, and out of the writers on Game of Thrones, he's the best one for sure.
Okay.
The best episode of this season, which was episode 2, was written by Brian Cogman. So yeah,
It's funny, in my reviews, I was defending season 8 up until I think it was episode 3. And I think in season episode 2, I was like, this one felt a little better. I didn't know which writer was behind it, but that's at least good in my perspective to hear that. And if there's any, Amazon has more money than God, most countries. Yeah.
I thought, thank God, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah, and that probably.
you're
So
loaded.
if I know that like studio involvement can still be a huge issue, but I'm at least not concerned that things won't look bad. Although with a conversation I just had with someone, they were pointing out that the best seasons of Game of Thrones had the smallest budget. I mean,
For
it's
sure.
it's really not about the budget 100%. So I don't know. I would take half the budget and guarantee good writers
Yeah,
any
it's
day.
like Game of Thrones and definitely the later seasons, they rely on how it looks for certain. And to be honest, I'm a little bit worried about the Lord of the Rings series still, even though it's Amazon and they have this budget, because I feel like a lot of people have a bad taste left in their mouth from those Hobbit movies. Uh, and I like them because I'm just such a big fan of Middle Earth, but they were rather uninspired. There was a lot of just stuff going on in those that was just kind of like, why are you doing this? It just feels like filler. I know this is gonna be something different. This is totally different people, totally different take, but I feel like maybe don't rush into this with $1 billion and put all your money into this because it could fail.
Yeah.
You might not be able to pull this off.
And this might sound cynical, but I'm hoping that a lot of these people, even over at Amazon, are looking at what happened with Game of Thrones and they're realizing, oh, we need sustenance. It can't all be Flash. There needs to be sustenance from beginning to end, and hopefully a plan from beginning to end.
For sure. I know that's the problem with Game of Thrones.
So you touched on one here that I actually, I was a little sneaky. This is something I want to talk with you specifically about. And that is the Dune adaptation, because I don't mean to step on any toes. I'm not the biggest fan. I read the first Dune. I respect it immensely for what it was in its time and the concept, but just personal taste wise, I didn't love it. But I do absolutely adore the director. Arrival is one of the best films of the last 10 years, in my opinion. Same thing with Blade Runner 2049. I mean, the guy is one of the best visionary directors. And if there's anyone, and if there's any source material that certainly has vision that I'd love to see realized, it is Dune. And I'm curious to see where it'll go. But from your perspective as a fan, I imagine seeing Denis Villeneuve attached is spectacular.
I mean, it's the best possible feeling to know that he's directing this film. Just to have someone that loves the story so much and has such passion and has such talent and just really cares about telling a story, because that's all you need to tell a good story is just to care about the characters and to care about the story that you're trying to tell. So yeah, I couldn't be more excited. I couldn't see this. I can't even name a better director. I can't even think of one. And just everything from who's doing the score to who's doing the cinematography and the set design, the actors, everything is just great.
See, my dad's given me crap a couple times because I've said Denis Villeneuve is the closest we've come to another Kubrick, and I stand
Mhm.
by that because the guy
Agreed.
just he goes from genre to genre and just knocks it out of the damn park every single time. Excuse me. It seems like he's finding a little bit of a home in sci-fi with
Mhm.
Arrival and Blade Runner 2049 and now Dune. But he's also done just great, like Sicario, I believe, is by him as well, and it's
Sicario.
spectacular. Yeah.
Sicario completely shocked me because I had seen Enemy by him, which is like this psychological thriller type thing, this paranoid little movie, and I seen Arrival, which is science fiction, Blade Runner. And then I saw Sicario, and it was like this completely different kind of, totally not my style, kind of like very, very, very high action film. But it was just like he can do it all.
And it's one of those movies that makes you uncomfortable. Sicario made me uncomfortable. And you mentioned Enemy. Enemy is a movie. The first time I watched it, I hated it, and then I watched it again, and I picked up on all the little clues and hints of what's really going on, and I
Yeah,
absolutely loved it.
great
Um,
twist.
Yeah, but I just didn't pay close enough attention the first time
Yeah.
through. And if a director can make it so that I need to pay that close attention, he's doing something right in my book. But you also have seen Dune get this rock star cast involved. I mean, you have people like Dave Bautista, Jason Momoa, Javier Bardem, people who are huge. And it's strange to me because I don't mean to talk down about these actors, but you have someone like Javier Bardem, who, in my opinion, is one of the best villains we've seen recently on any movie. I mean, his work in No Country for Old Men. Am I thinking of the right movie, or is that There Will Be Blood?
Yeah, that's him.
Okay. Is fantastic. And you compare that to like Dave Bautista, who I love, don't get me wrong, he's fun, but I don't know if he could be on the same caliber. It's an interesting mix. You know what I mean?
Well, I get it, because with those two particular characters, I don't think those two characters ever have an interaction in Dune. So that would be Stilgar and the Beast Raban, who is the eldest or the second
right.
nephew of the Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah.
And Stilgar's just a desert freeman.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm interested. When I first heard that Batista was cast, I thought it was perfect because I thought Raban, he's kind of just a side dumb idiot character anyway. He'll fit right into this. I'm not saying that Batista's some idiot, but he definitely plays an idiot in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
It's kind of like he's been typecasted here.
Right. I knew you weren't saying that, but could be taken that way. And Jason Momoa is not someone, I haven't seen him in enough to really judge his ability. I've seen him in Game of Thrones, obviously, but I haven't watched Aquaman. That doesn't really interest me that much.
I'm most afraid about Jason Momoa, if I'm being honest, because he is playing Duncan Idaho, who, let's say they move beyond book one and they do more Dune books. Like Duncan Idaho is the only character that's in every single Dune book. And he's not essentially the same character in every book because he keeps getting brought back. So he has different traits and emotions.
Right.
So it's like, if they were to do that, really, could Jason Momoa come back and portray all these different nuances? And I don't think so. I haven't seen that from him.
For me, that character really needs an actor who can lose themselves in a role. And I can't even picture me looking at Jason Momoa and not seeing Jason Momoa. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain actors that completely disappear. And even when he's doing Khal Drogo, in my head, I'm like, that's Jason Momoa. It doesn't ever really change beyond that.
For sure. And yeah, because it's like casting Angelina Jolie to be like Jessica or something. Everyone would be like, this is Angelina Jolie. You kind of need an unknown person for a role like that, but I get it. They want the star power. They want to put people in here so they say, oh, we know who this is. Because not everybody knows what Dune is.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone 40 plus does, but unfortunately this younger generation of sci-fi fans is, I don't think it's quite lived on to be read by all of them as well. So you mentioned more movies. I never even began to think about that. I was just so excited that this one's clearly being built up and having the resources put into it. But even though there are sequels, I think there's 6 Dune books total now.
Yeah.
To me, it's still one of the few fantasy sci-fi type franchises I would actually prefer to see done in a movie, just because the way it's written, the way it's conceptualized. I prefer that for Dune over a TV show, just because, yes, most fantasy epics I think do require a TV show approach now. Dune is built in a way where I don't think it fits. Would you agree, as someone who's a bigger fan than myself?
That first book, the Sci-Fi Channel did a mini series, and I think they split it into maybe 3 sections. That first book is split into 3 specific parts, and I know Denis Villeneuve is doing 2 separate movies. But yeah, Dune doesn't really work episodically. Like, you couldn't do like an hour of Dune and then cut it, and an hour of Dune and then cut it. It wouldn't work as well as like several movies or just one really long movie.
Mm-hmm. See, I would either say, it has to be a movie or maybe a miniseries approach where it is very definitive beginnings and ends. But I don't, because originally the first Dune book, correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't plan sequels. Those were added on by Frank Herbert's son, correct?
Well, Frank Herbert planned out the original 7 books, right?
Oh, okay.
And he wrote 6 of them before he died, and his son finished the final book off of the notes that he had.
Okay.
But he actually ended up making 2 books out of Frank Herbert's notes.
Okay, I was under the impression it was completely the other way. Okay, did his son do a decent job as a fan perspective?
No, not at all. And pretty much everyone agrees. It didn't end well.
Oh no, that's bad to hear. There's a few other that really stick out to me. I'm excited for The Witcher. A lot of stuff I've seen for that has been interesting, to say the least. The only thing that I still am not 100% on is Henry Cavill as Geralt of Rivia. It kind of feels like the Jason Momoa casting a little bit, but I don't know if they're going for a younger Geralt. I could see um, Henry Cavill doing it. Henry Cavill. I don't know. There's so many names. I don't know. It's just I don't. Are you familiar with the Witcher series? I might be going down
Yes.
it. Okay.
Yes. And when I saw the promo of him, he didn't have any scars. So that's why I was like, is this when he just became The Witcher? I've never read the books, but I have played The Witcher 3, the video game. So I'm curious as to what they're doing with Netflix. I like Henry Cavill, and I'm hoping that he can disappear in that character. I have seen the DC superhero movies. I still don't really think of him as Superman, though. That's interesting. I guess it's because I grew up on a totally different Superman.
Christopher
So
Reeves is forever Superman to
yeah,
me. That's
yeah. I mean,
um,
I think he looked kind of weird in the wig. I was like, oh, that's a little weird. Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what they do.
they need to add scars. Even if he is early on Witcher for me, just
Yeah.
for the vibe, you got to add scars.
Yeah.
That's my opinion on that. He also like I've seen how jacked he is for Superman. You got to lose like 50 pounds of muscle there.
Yeah.
Like that's not the Witcher in my book. The Witcher shouldn't look like he can bench me over his head and throw me. That's not the right vibe.
Yeah. And two, it's Netflix that's doing it right, and that's the thing with Netflix. They are so hit or miss. They are Netflix. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good at all.
They are remarkably hit or miss.
Yeah.
They, I would say, have some of the best shows of the last 10 years, and then they also have some of the absolute worst. I still remember sitting down to watch Hemlock Grove, and I hated that. I hated it so much. And most people seem to have completely forgotten about it.
Somebody said to me like, "Oh, you like witches? You watch Hemlock Grove?" And I think I tried to watch like 30 minutes of the first episode. And I was, this is like a teen soap opera that would be on like the CW or something. I don't know. I wasn't into it.
No, I'm not either. Well, I think Netflix. I hope a lot of these studios are learning their lesson, which is something I think people have been saying since 1940, where they're looking at what's working and not, and letting the creative minds behind these things take control and really run it. I mean, that's one of the things I've had quite a bit of hope for. I just put out a video today talking about the fact that Brandon Sanderson has personally read the first two scripts for Wheel of Time and given them his seals approval. He said, "I like these. You're taking a good direction." But what you see is some backlash where fans, like Brandon Sanderson mentioned, like, "Oh, but they made some changes. They're changes I agree with," and then fans freak out because they're like, "Well, you shouldn't make any changes at all ever." And then now with the ending of Game of Thrones, I see that coming up even more. More people are saying, "Never change it. Just adapt it faithfully." And I find that to be a really dumb approach because just because you're changing mediums and there's things like budgets, changes have to be made. It's unavoidable, and especially when it comes to narrative choices. Like people always praise Lord of the Rings for being such a faithful adaptation to movies, but they really weren't. They cut whole characters, multiple whole characters.
Yeah, and there was that wizard guy. I always forget his name.
Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much that they cut from the Lord of the Rings, and even if you go back and look at that first season of Game of Thrones, there's plenty that's different. That first book is like 900 pages. There's no way they would have been able to fit that into 10 hours of television.
Without doubt.
There's a lot of cuts and there's a lot of changes even from the beginning, but a lot of that stuff was necessary initially.
Yeah, and it's not about keeping faithful to source material or changing it unnecessarily. It's about having a realistic view of what you can portray. Because, like, the Game of Thrones TV show is so much less magical than the books. That's probably a more cool way to phrase that, but I'm going to call it magical, like Miss Fritz from Magic School Bus. But I think that's just because of the budget they had. They had to make that choice early on. And so then the rest of the show had to be a bit less magical because you can't just suddenly ramp it up. I don't feel like certain adaptations, like Wheel of Time, doesn't really have that option. The magic system's so integral to the story. You got it from Winter's Night onward. Channeling has to be a thing.
Yeah, the Wheel of Time. It's just, they right in the beginning. It's like armies of Trollocs and lightning bolts and just everything. It's all over the place.
That's why the Wheel of Time for me is one where it's so dependent on the actual budget they release, which, again, I don't mean to sound like I'm all about money, but Wheel of Time is one where it needs one hell of a budget to be done right.
That's why they've always failed before, because you got to come right out with the money. And the thing about Game of Thrones is like you can do this thing where you start off with not that very much fantasy, because that's what George R. R. Martin does in the books.
Mm-hmm.
George R. R. Martin, he starts the books off with it's just the politics and it's just the people of the kingdoms and stuff just hanging out, kind of like making the world feel very realized and real. And then the magic slowly creeps in later on. And I feel like in the show, they just didn't let it creep in. They're just like, no, we're just going to stay here. We're just going to stay on this like middle ground.
They cut the warging way down. They cut, well, even just from a budgetary perspective, they cut so many of the scenes that were these huge spectacles became just people standing in a circle talking, which in some situations can work, like the highly political stuff, but there's certain situations that need spectacle.
The King's Moot was very disappointing. I
Yeah,
talked about that in my Year On video. That was very disappointing. And also one of my main ones from really early on that I thought, oh, I don't know if this is going to be good. And it was like kind of the first red flag. It was the fact that in season 2, Danny's Karth story was very different.
yeah.
It's pretty much an entirely different story. It's not even the same. And I was like, oh, I don't. They seem to be taking some pretty significant liberties with this. But then I thought maybe they're mixing some of this stuff up. She's going to get out of here, and then they can. And it seemed like they got back on track, but then it just kind of went haywire from there.
Well, there were changes to there that just didn't make sense to me. They didn't seem like budget changes or time saving
No.
changes. It felt like the writers being like, I can write something more interesting. And I'm sorry, no, you can't. Yeah, that didn't work out. There's the speaking of one adaptation I actually have a lot of faith for. I'm not the biggest Kingkiller fan, but I don't. Are you familiar with the books?
I love those books. Yeah.
I think they are, in terms of scope, scale, character work, perfectly set up to be adapted. It almost seems like Patrick Rothfuss wrote them with being adapted in mind, with how they are structured. I mean, you don't need huge armies at any point, at least so far in the series. The magic system can be done within a reasonable budget. So those ones I have a lot of faith for, and think can be done pretty easily.
Yeah. Really excited to see Quoth on the big screen or whatever screen. Yeah, it's the main character, and then he's got like his little group of friends at the magic school, the magic college. He's got his own little backstory. It's his perspective always. So yeah, that's the best type of story to adapt into a television show or a movie, because it's not like switching between all these different people like the Wheel of Time and especially Game of Thrones. And yeah,
Got grown up Harry Potter with diss tracks coming down the road.
that is 100% how I always market not the Wheel, but the Kingkiller Chronicles to anyone that wants to read them. Like, it's adult Harry Potter, essentially.
Yeah. And then there's another Chronicles of Narnia in the work. I have yet to see one person show much interest in that. I'm not a fan. Are you particularly interested in Chronicles?
I read those books when I was very young, and they were never my favorites. I think I saw the first movie in theaters when it was coming out, and I really liked it. And then I just kind of fizzled out on the rest of them. I don't really remember what happens in the books at all. I'm curious with this adaptation, where are they going to go from it? Because I'm pretty sure they stopped after like 3 books with the film adaptations.
Yeah.
Or so are they starting back over from the beginning, or is telling something else, doing like a whole twist on Narnia? I'm wondering what they're going to do.
I believe it's a complete reboot. And if there's any series I think they should take as many liberties with as possible, incoming controversial statement that's going to cause comments to go off, I think they should change the Chronicles of Narnia a whole lot, because the themes that C.S. Lewis put in there, I think, haven't aged super well and will not resonate with an audience anymore, in my opinion, because they're pretty heavy Christian themes, which is fine. That's okay. But it's something that audience have seen a lot, and people are now looking for more intense, gritty, real fantasy. And while I do think Chronicles of Narnia are good on their own merit, I just don't see them taking off, especially when the competition is going to be so goddamn high these next few years.
Yeah, it's a lot of religious symbolism for
Yeah.
sure.
Aslan is Jesus. Like, this is pretty straightforward a lot of the times.
That might have had something to do with what turned me off about it early on, but I can't really remember. It was
It was one of those shows, or sorry, one of those movies where I watched it and I like looked at my mom and I was like, so do we need to go read the Bible now to get this? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So you also have shown quite a bit of interest in sci-fi from looking at your channel. I've seen you mention the Foundation trilogy, which is also being adapted, as well as many others.
How they're going to do that? That's the one I'm most confused about. I have no idea.
I'm a huge classic sci-fi fan. I think it's great. I think it's one of the best genres someone can get into, because classic sci-fi explored ideas like nothing else. But I do not think you can adapt it well to the screen, because it just doesn't work for pacing and interest and maintaining the audience. I just don't see it working.
They skip hundreds of years in Foundation. It's like one chapter is like 150 years later. It's like, what? How can you do that in a television show?
Right, because it's not about character. There's some characters you kind of care about, I guess, but it's more about concept and ramifications of those concepts than individuals.
Yeah. So yeah, Foundation is about an empire building slowly over like 1,500 years or something like that. So it's like, what would you make the television show about? I mean, you would almost have to just slow it down and like focus on like a few group of characters, and that wouldn't be Foundation. So what is, I don't know.
It would fundamentally change what it is. Like, it's just not Foundation. It's like I mean, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say, but the Will Smith I, Robot movie, That's not iRobot
Not
at
at all.
all. No.
Not at all. Because I mention Asimov to people, and they say the guy that wrote iRobot, like in the movie. I'm like, oh, don't even think about the movie. That's not even kind of what the story is here.
Not even a little bit. I mean, and that's, I don't think there have been really any classic sci-fi adaptations that have been great, except for Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. But even that was only, that was loosely pulling from a few sci-fi sources, but not really being an adaptation of anything.
I didn't see the Ender's Game movie. I think there's another 1984 in the works too.
Oh, there is? Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Someone's always working on a 1984 movie because it's like, I think the book since like 2016, like American stuff, like it's skyrocketed in sales. People are like, oh my God, 1984, because everyone loves to jump on a bandwagon and be like, oh, this now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certain things from it that certainly now ring more true, but that goes back to like the whole Chronicles of Narnia thing I was saying. If the themes of your book still resonate, you're way more likely to succeed in an adaptation. You briefly mentioned Ender's Game. That's one of the few sci-fi books I think could be adapted well, because it's starting to focus more on character there. Ender's Game is about this boy instead of just being like this 1500-year rise of a whole nother civilization. So that's one where I'm like, okay, you could do that. But then you have the problem where everyone knows the big twist. So you lose one of the big hooks of the book. Do you try to change that twist and piss off a lot of people? Like, it's, to me, that's a lose-lose situation. There's certain things that just cannot be adapted. And
yeah. Well, I don't know if this is being adapted, but I would love to see Hyperion, Dan Simmons, come on screen. I don't know if you've read that series.
I'm familiar with it. I'm surprised to hear you say that, to be honest.
Yeah, Hyperion, I love those books. They're great. And he was a guy, he kind of took Dune, and forgive me, my people that love Dune, because I love Dune too. He kind of took Dune and made it kind of more interesting and more accessible, and just put in kind of just more realized characters and just kind of better characters that felt more human. Because in the Dune universe, everyone's so elevated. You've got the Bene Gesserit and the Mentat, and everyone's just like so like higher order level thinking. There's no like humans. But Hyperion's really just more accessible, just better characters, in my opinion. I'd like to see that.
Well, I find it fascinating how the modern writing trends is to make more relatable, understandable characters. Like if you look at fantasy books from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, people are not that relatable. You don't really care about the individual as much as you do now. And I think that's one of the reasons where if I was a studio and I wanted to adapt a fantasy book and jumped on this bandwagon, I wouldn't be buying a old classic Arthurian tale. I'd be going after Mistborn. I'd be going after Kingkiller Chronicles. I'd be going after, something like that. I find to be way more approachable to a mass audience.
Definitely. But everyone, I think these studios, they want to go after, they're looking for things with name recognition, things that already have fan bases. They see this stuff and they think, oh, people know about this. Let me make this into something. Because to them, it's all about numbers. And I feel like that's why it's so hit or miss. The Dune people lucked out by getting Villeneuve. Because sometimes it's literally just like, this has a fan base behind it. This has a following. Let's push it out. We don't care if it's good. We just care that it's delivered to us on this date and it makes this amount of money.
Okay. So let's say the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy suddenly is about to get adapted, which is one I'm still amazed we have not seen an announcement that that's being adapted, because I think it's perfect for a trilogy of movies to come out. Is there a director you'd have in mind for a Mistborn adaptation?
I don't know, no particular director, but I would love to see that adapted. Those are books that I just really like reading and just existing in that world, and just kind of, I never really thought about adapting it, to be honest.
Really? To me, it was, as soon as I read the first one, I was like, oh, these are perfect. Make them movies. Make them movies now.
Well, it's definitely, those are some of the better books, for sure, in the fantasy genre, because there's a lot of crap out here.
And then there's, oh God, there's the whole what's happening with Harry Potter controversy.
The Fantastic Beast movies is what controversy?
Oh, I just meant J.K. Rowling's tweets.
Oh, just J.K. Rowling being like apparently, okay, look, okay, so this is the thing. I could be wrong, but I feel like Dumbledore being gay, I knew that when I was a kid. I feel like she said that like years and years and years ago.
That was the one everyone's okay with.
Yeah, and so, but I did see the most recent Fantastic Beast movie, and I'm kind of just like zoned out on this now, because it was like some, I don't want to like spoil the twist, but there's a stupid twist at the end of the most recent movie that makes no sense. It's like it's total retcon. Like, we've never heard of this character before. Like, how does this character exist? So that was super weird. And I know there's like some other political stuff that people like rag on her for sometimes. So I know like there's some, I don't know exactly what the controversy is, but I know there's.
Well, at the risk of getting into controversy here, I'll go ahead and just talk about it, because there's So basically, people are accusing her of being hindsight woke, where she's trying to feel like she's updating Harry Potter to fit modern politics through Twitter, when
Mm-hmm.
people are saying like, "Hey, that's not what you originally wrote." So it
Mm-hmm.
feels like you're just trying to fit in, and it's not real. It's just fake wokeness.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole poop thing, which everyone thought was just, I'm sorry,
Oh,
gross.
the teleporting, the poop. I did hear
Yeah,
about that, but I was at the same time I was kind of just like, well, if they were wizards, then why not? I can just, there's stupider stuff in Harry Potter. I mean, maybe not, but there's a lot of hokey, weird stuff in Harry Potter. That's just like I don't know.
the problem with it though is to the teleportation spell required isn't taught till like the third year. So
Oh,
everyone's like, okay, Harry Potter doesn't have plumbing. What do the first 3 years do?
yeah.
Because she specifically said there was no plumbing. So everyone's
Oh,
like, uh,
that isn't. No, that's not true. I mean, because they get to the Chamber of Secrets through the bathroom.
exactly. And people point that out. And people even say, like, Chamber of Secrets has been here from the start. And
I don't know about the J.K. Rowling. I don't know. She's a little crazy, isn't she? I don't know.
that kind of success and fame is going to get to anybody. I don't like, I'm not one of these people who's mad at her or think she's like a bad person. I just think, it's easy to send out a tweet at 3 a.m. because you think you have a good idea.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's going to blow up in your face.
I did see something. Okay, so as like a black guy, I remember she was like, when they did the Cursed Child play, Hermione was casted as a black actress, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, Hermione's not black." And then she had said something like, "I never said she was white. I just said she had curly hair and frizzy hair or something like that." And I remember someone posting the page of her being like, "Hermione's white face" or something like that, or something like that. And I'm like, "Oh, you should have went back and made sure you never said that."
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff where like I think there's good intentions behind it, and I'm totally fine with good intentions, especially if you piss off the anti-diversity crowd. I'm all for pissing them off. Like,
Yeah,
do whatever you need to do to make them angry.
screw those people.
Yeah. Well, there's the whole God. My comment sections whenever I talk about the upcoming Wheel of Time adaptations, I will get 5 to 10 people who I have to just make myself not respond to because they say like the diverse. They're either saying one, the diversity that's already in the series is bad, which that always starts like I'm not racist, and I'm like,
Mhm.
but you just said some racist, or it then moves on to I've heard that they're like gonna ramp up the female roles and that's gonna ruin the series. And it's like anytime, first of all, if you read Wheel of Time, you don't see it as a diverse series. You didn't read the Wheel of Time right, because Robert
Yeah,
Jordan specifically set out to have this very culturally diverse series. He treats culture like many fantasy authors treat their fantasy races, and he just made it all human, but they're all extraordinarily different, inspired by different real life cultures,
yeah.
which is cool. But I don't understand how someone can read that and then be like, well, if Land's Asian, I'm out. I'm like, well, he's described as Asian. That's what he is.
Yeah. And I mean, there's already significant female roles in that whole series. I mean, what do you mean?
Yeah, it's
Ramp?
the majority of the series is from a female perspective.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't understand what the issue would be. And it's like in people were talking about Game of Thrones prequels too, and there was someone was mentioning the Amethyst Empress, and they were saying, "Is Naomi Watts the Amethyst Empress?" And I tweeted like, "Oh, she better not be. The Amethyst Empress needs to be Asian for sure." And then I got some comments of people saying like, "Oh, he never says that she was Asian." Clearly, the Great Empire of the Dawn is inspired. It's clearly ancient Asia. I mean, come on, are you insane?
Yeah,
But
it's and I thought, like, what do you expect George R. R. Martin to say in the books to let you know she's Asian? Like, put a little star at the bottom and be like, by the way, she's Asian colored. Like, that's
exactly.
not that's not how this works. You just need to infer from the context and the complexion of the skin that's inspired or described. Um,
George R. Martin goes out of his way to help you. Like the World of Ice and Fire book, if you open it up, you go to the page that says ET, and it has a picture of Asian-looking people standing
yeah,
right there. It's
yeah.
like,
Now,
whatever.
I've actually never really explored this topic on my channel, but there is some backlash I've seen for Wheel of Time where people say it's culturally insensitive to blend cultures the way Robert Jordan does, which I cannot understand that statement.
I feel like almost every writer does that.
Yeah,
Um, that's one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever heard. George R. Martin does it. Frank Herbert does it.
yeah.
I mean, the Fremen are just a combination of like Buddhist and is Muslims and just a bunch of different stuff. I mean,
Yeah, I don't entirely get it. I think what they're basically pulling from is because he made like the Shan Chan, this Asian slash Roman inspired imperial regime who have slaves, and then made them mixed race. People are saying like, oh, it just makes no sense. And I'm like, this is just the other end of the spectrum of the argument where you just want it to like, no,
yeah.
how about we just adapt what the author wrote and go from there and stop acting like some guy writing a book is going to have these huge negative impacts on the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just silly. Like to write anything, you have to take stuff from the real world. And if you're not mixing stuff around, then you're just stealing from the real world essentially and just putting and saying I invented this. So like you kind of have to do that.
Oh, there's no original things. Like that's
No.
what it is. Everyone pulls from something. I mean, people always claim. I will say Tolkien is one of the most like influential fantasy writers of all time, but I'm not going to say he's the most original because all he did was pull from mythologies before him and make them into this fantasy world, an incredibly well realized one. But it's still all pulled from pre-existing mythology in one way or another.
Definitely.
Yeah. Which I think there's some arguments to be made where this rise of anti-fantasy we're seeing that Game of Thrones is largely responsible for, where it's more minimalist, is I think good for the genre because I think the biggest thing keeping people away from becoming fantasy fans is their preconception that it's all this like Arthurian tale, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings stuff. A lot of people don't realize that these more modern, really relatable books like Mistborn, like Stormlight, exist, where it is much more character driven and not about just these complex magic systems, even though the magic systems are more badass than ever.
Yeah, and I think what turns people off about fantasy too is that there's a lot of bad fantasy. And one of the traps that lesser writers fall into is just like making the magic be like a end all be all solution to everything. That really ruins your story. If you can do anything with magic, then nothing matters. And some people just really can't figure that out, and that turns a lot of people off from fantasy. Even in Game of Thrones, I had some friends watching it as this show was going on, and they were saying, "Oh, like now they're doing this. I hope this random thing doesn't happen." And I had to explain basically, well, in this series, there's a set of rules, and only certain stuff can't happen. Basically, George R. Martin is establishing the rules, and there are constraints within this world. But then they kind of like let that go in the later seasons, and I'm just kind of left looking like a sprung up chicken. Like, oh, I was wrong, I guess. That's how it should have been.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's why so many people are drawn to hard magic systems now because they're not MacGuffins. You have these set of rules, and you cannot push past them. I mean, there's of course a huge spectrum for that. You have the complete soft magic system like Harry Potter. You have the more middle ground like Avatar: The Last Airbender, because I can't think of a better example right now. And then you have your super hard Brandon Sanderson style magic systems where he's doing basically math to map them out.
Yeah, he is super hardcore, and you got Rothfuss. He touches on that like a little bit in Kingkiller Chronicles. There's like the more meticulous like kind of magic system, and then there's that like higher order like mysterious magic. So he keeps that up there, so he can kind of like play on that a little bit. So it's kind of like he mixes the two kind of together.
I would say the only thing I'm really missing from Rothfuss's is a more detailed explanation. I still don't entirely get his magic system.
Yeah.
I want him to tell me more.
Yeah, he's definitely not as detailed as Sanderson. And one complaint about that series that a lot of people that I've even recommended it to, they just say that they feel like the main character is kind of a Mary Sue and that he just kind of gets everything that he wants. And
that was my biggest complaint in my review.
I said the same thing. I was like, okay, that's definitely true. But then I kind of tried to defend it a little bit. And I don't know if this is just me going back and trying to and putting things here that aren't there. But I was thinking that maybe since the entire story is, quote, relaying a story to Chronicle, and he does say in the beginning that all good stories have some lies in them. Maybe he's just lying to make himself seem better. But then that's also kind of like giving Rothfuss an out, saying, yeah, so I don't know.
So I've heard the unreliable narrator theory before. It's a good theory. I like it. But if I think about it thoroughly, there's two options. Well, I don't know. I'll figure this out as I go. He's not an unreliable narrator, and everything's just working out for him like this. And he's, spoiler alert for Kingkiller Chronicles for people listening, and he's just going to go back to have endless sex with this fairy or whatever at some point and kill her. I don't know. We're going to get something from there. Or two, he is an unreliable narrator, in which case he's a total jackass who just lies to make himself look good, and nothing he's really saying is true because all this stuff is heavily interconnected. And I'm going to be mad because I just read these 3 books that are all from this guy who's just lying all the time's perspective. It's not like an American Psycho unreliable narrator, where in the book there's a lot of little nuggets to let you know, and there's a purpose to it being an unreliable narrator. I feel like if Kingkiller turned around and it was just like, oh, that wasn't true, there wouldn't be a wider message. There wouldn't be a purpose to it. It would just be, okay, I was lied to. Great.
Yeah, because this book is all about these amazing things that Quoth did. Like this guy is coming to him to write down all these amazing things that he did to find out that it's not true. It would take all of the weight out of the series.
I would feel so bad for Chronicler. He wrote so much, and then it just turns out like, oh, nope, got to go burn this book.
He's like, by the way, all of this was a lie. He's like, really, dude? Now I'll tell you the real story.
But, you know, the adaptation of Kingkiller is looking spectacular. The fact they have Lin-Manuel Miranda attached is, nothing I would have ever seen coming, but 2, really impressive. Oh, you didn't hear that? Yeah, he's attached
No,
now.
I haven't really heard anything about the series. I think I heard about it being adapted maybe like a year ago. I heard like whisperings of it.
There's going to be a prequel, and there's going to be a TV show and a movie, and there's going to be and one of them's a prequel and one of them's the actual series.
So which one is which?
I'm trying to remember. I think the TV show is the movies, or the TV show is the TV. Wow, God, the TV show is the movies. I think the TV show is the books, and the movie will be a prequel, but I could be mistaken on that.
Kind of makes sense because you could use the movie to kind of like set up the world and explain what this world is. Like put in some of that, what would be exposition in the book, you could just kind of show
Right.
that in the movie. And then so by the time you get to quote, it's like, oh, we get what world this is.
I imagine Patrick Rothfuss is in some hot water right now because whatever runners or whoever is in charge of adapting his stuff is probably looking at, wow, once they ran out of material for Game of Thrones, they didn't know what to do. Patrick, you said years ago everything's done. Give it to us. And I personally don't believe Patrick has it done. So
Patrick, it's such an interesting thing because he's been working on Doors of Stone since George R. R. Martin started working on The Winds of Winter.
Mhm.
So like George R. R. Martin, he always took his time with his books from the beginning. He's been working on these books for like last 30 years or something like that since I've been alive. And Rothfuss, it's like you got 3 books, dude. This is the last book in the trilogy. Get it out. You've been working on it for like what 9 years at this point, dude. I'm like, I don't want to. I'm not one of those people that's like rushed because I'm not like one of those people that's like I demand art now. Take your time
Yeah.
to do it. But at the same time, you don't want to get in this George R. R. Martin situation where they're going past your books and it's just ended in this crazy way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And echoing off what you said there, to all these people on Twitter who are tweeting at George R. R. Martin trying to rush him, tweeting at Patrick Rothfuss, you suck.
Yeah.
Those people are artists. Let them finish. I get it's been a long time, but you can't rush art.
But I said at Jordan Con to someone that I was convinced that Rothfuss wouldn't release Doors of Stone until George R. R. Martin released Winds of Winter. Then they'll be like, okay, now I gotta do it. This guy's done it. I gotta get mine out now.
There keeps being these like fake tweets passed around. It's like Brandon Sanderson, like fake tweets of him being like, well, I guess I'll finish Game of Thrones or something like that. Which he'd never do that, but it's a funny idea.
Yeah. I mean, he'd be the one. I'd be like, okay, he can come in.
Oh, I don't think he could totally finish Game of Thrones in any way, shape, or form. He can't handle that tone.
Oh, because yeah, you're right. It's way too dark and gritty. And there's like George R. R. Martin. George R. I love that guy, but he's kind of got like a Stephen King level darkness to him, where like there's some dark stuff in those books. I'm just like, it must have been like where I think that if I was writing this, I would be like cringing, not because it's bad, just because it's like so brutal and dark writing it. It's like,
Yeah, and that's you hit the nail on the head there with the Stephen King parallel, I think, because it's astounding to me not only how similar a lot of their writing, like the way they write graphic content, but have you seen the interview where basically they sat down across from each other and just talked? And yeah. Also, they hated on my favorite author at the very beginning, which yeah, I was like, okay, that felt uncalled for, but
it was mainly Stephen King though. George R. R. Martin was kind of like, Stephen King was like, those books suck. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, but I also love that George R. R. Martin looked at him and said, "How the hell do you put out so many books?"
Because Stephen King writes a mile a minute. He just goes.
I feel so bad for whoever his editor is because, especially back in the 80s, that must have been one heck of a job.
Yeah, for sure.
Stephen King, you just put the words cocaine 500 times on a page. What am I supposed to do with this?
Dude, yes. When George asked him that, I just thought in my head, he's thinking cocaine.
Pretty much. But are you a big Stephen King fan? Have you read a lot of his material?
Oh, for sure. I love Dark Tower. I love The Stand. It is one of my favorite books ever. And I swear to God, I'm not jumping on the It bandwagon. I was pushing for It before like these movies. And I still think that movie did do it justice. That movie was just kind of like whatever. But like It is one of my favorite books ever. The Stand, Dark Tower. I really like Dreamcatcher too, even though a lot of people hate on Dreamcatcher.
Dreamcatcher's all right.
Yeah, Carrie was the first Stephen King book I ever read. And
Okay.
I love Carrie. Shining. I just love all his work. I love his books.
So I think it takes a truly mad genius to adapt a Stephen King book to film most of the time. Like that's why it took Kubrick. It took Kubrick to do Shining because you need someone. Yeah. Kubrick was willing to harass his actress to the point where she was losing hair so she could portray a Stephen King level of anxiety. He actually did that. The actress who played, I forget her name, was actually losing hair by the end of filming, which is a horrible thing, and no one should do that to anybody. But the end result is spectacular. So I believe that. And when it comes to It, I do not think It can be adapted to a movie. I don't think it would possibly work. That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean that first movie, my main problem with it was I'm like, they cut out all the cosmic horror. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, you got another chance to go 8. I was like, okay, now they're gonna put in all this weird, esoteric, cosmic horror. I don't know why I even thought that. Because initially, okay, I can't say his name. Cary Fukunaga was
I
originally he was originally gonna do it, both of the movies. But then he pulled out at the last minute, and I thought he would have been so perfect because he did the first season of True Detective on HBO.
one of
And
the
that
best seasons of television ever.
yeah, and that wasn't like a fantasy thing, but he kind of, I think, captured that like sense of just like this haunted town. And there's so much history in this place, and like people know about it, like the older people know about it, but like no one's like just saying it. There's something very wrong with this town. I thought like, oh, he could totally deliver the sense of like that Derry is just like this haunted place. There's this malevolent presence here, and he could like really pull it across and make it super subtle. But then they just kind of went with this kind of like just generic kind of like jump scare horror type deal, and I just wasn't. And it was all about the clown too. That's one of my biggest complaints with like always with like it is all they always make it about Pennywise. I'm just like, it is not Pennywise. He is way beyond just this clown thing.
The way
And
I've thought about it is Pennywise is a cancer, and all sorry, yeah, Pennywise. No, okay, how am I trying to phrase this? That what's happening in Derry is a cancer, and that is where the focus should be. All Pennywise is a symptom of that cancer.
yeah,
And then you make it so basically if you make your whole movie about just this jump scaring clown, you're losing what really made it, the book, truly terrifying. Something on
yeah.
this grander scope.
And one day, I don't know if how what they're going to do in the second half of the movie because I don't want to spoil anything. So once I see that movie, I want to kind of come back on YouTube and like kind of talk about the book more because I have done some videos on the book in the past and
Mhm.
kind of like give my talk because he was definitely like pulling from a lot of Lovecraftian stuff. He because that's what it is. It is just his Lovecraftian monster that's in his little Stephen King universe because it came. I don't want to spoil it because
Oh, go right ahead. We'll say spoiler warning for Stephen King universe and just go ham.
Okay, so spoiler warning for Stephen King universe. In it, it's one of the greatest book twists ever when it turns from like this kind of supernatural horror thing to this kind of like sci-fi-esque thing.
Mhm.
Because these kids, they look into the past and they see the moment when it first came to Earth millions of years ago and it crashes in this kind of like spaceship type thing almost. And you find out this is an ancient, beyond time entity from some other dimension that came to Earth specifically so it could feed off of the emotions of people. It realized that there was something specific about human beings, their ability to contemplate fear the way that just other beings couldn't, and to just realize their terrors like other beings couldn't. And it was really rich food for this creature to feed on. So it came here and it knew that one day settlers would come to America, and it shaped this town in its own image and created its own little killing pen so that it could prepare itself to kind of, well, super, super spoilers. Like, if you don't want to hear this, and cut this off right now. But basically, the whole reason that it's there, like sleeping and coming back and feeding, is it's laying eggs. It's preparing to reproduce. And that's the big thing at the end of the book. And I'm just super scared because that could be really goofy. They didn't even try to do the whole egg thing at the end of the miniseries when I was a kid. They didn't even do
No.
it. And yeah.
Well, there's every time they try to adapt a Stephen King work, I always hope they'll somehow make it into the Stephen King wider universe which exists because all these stories are connected. It's all taking place in the same multi-dimensional space. The Dark Tower proves that. So spoiler warning for literally the entire Stephen King multiverse. But like in 11/22/63, when he goes to Derry and they mention the turtle and all of this incredible stuff, I want that. I want a MCU for Stephen King, and I think the source material's there. It just takes someone who's absolutely bonkers out of their mind to adapt it well. Um, I'd be
I
so
mean,
down, especially with how popular horror is right now.
have you seen Castle Rock? It's kind of the closest thing to that. I mean, they kind of fizzled out in those last few episodes, but it's kind of the closest thing to that where they're taking all of these different elements from the Stephen King universe and kind of like putting them all together. Because I feel like that's almost how you would have to do it. Because like the Stephen King just film universe is so saturated. I
Yeah,
feel like everyone would just be confused. Like, is this connected? Is that one connected? Is that
yeah.
one connected? So I feel like Castle Rock is doing, I feel like the closest thing they could. Because you would almost have to like stop doing Stephen King anything for like 15 years and then come back to like for it to be like, yeah. And I don't know.
I have not seen Castle Rock, unfortunately. I'll definitely add that to my list because I'm becoming more and more a Stephen King fan. I have like paper with like connecting lines, trying to figure everything out. I just finished Wolves of the Kala and got to the
Dark
scene.
Tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it got to the point where a character from oh god, not The Stand. what's the book I'm thinking of? At the very end, a character from one of the Stephen King books finds the book he's from in.
Yeah.
What's the book? Damn
I
it.
can't. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I cannot remember it either. It's been
It's
a
fine.
minute. Dog Tower.
But that was the only moment where I was like, I really hope Stephen King knows what he's doing, because that's a weird step to take as an
Yeah.
author. That
I
is
was.
yeah.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was talking to a friend of mine recently about The Stand, and she was like, in The Stand, the old woman mentions The Shining, but she's like, this can't possibly be in the same universe because in The Stand, everyone dies. And I'm like, just wait. I'm like, just get more into Stephen King, and it'll all make sense. I mean, it won't all make sense, but you'll understand what he's going for here. It's kind of like a multi-dimensional type. The Dark Tower really ties it all together, though. It really
Yeah.
does.
That's his backbone. That's the backbone of his universe.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm afraid of if they ever did try to do a Stephen King universe is it would come across more like what they're doing with Godzilla right now, which is fine for Godzilla, like a big.
It's monsters fighting. It's whatever.
But it would just be these quick, like, okay, we did Godzilla, King Kong, we're gonna do Godzilla and all of his monsters. Now we're gonna do Godzilla, King Kong, and check these boxes and whatever. A Stephen King universe, I don't want those scenes where it's like, oh, and look, Godzilla's here. It needs to be way more subtle. It needs to
Yeah.
like the whole the connection between it and The Shining that happens in it, where you see the last name similarities and all that.
Yeah.
That is so subtle. I didn't catch it right away.
Mhm.
I had to go back and be like, that name sounds so oh damn. Like it was one of those moments. Or if you just have literally the writing on the wall of like, oh, Pennywise or something.
Pennywise lives I think that's what book is that in? I think it's Dreamcatcher, because the kids in Dreamcatcher grew up in Derry, and they go back at some point and they see Pennywise lives written in red or something like that.
But I don't know, it's something that needs to be handled with subtlety, but at the same time, it's Stephen King, so occasionally it's not very subtle at all. And what I like about his multiverse is that he does hold his cards very close to his chest at times. Like there's obvious hints that this stuff's all connected, but he's never explained, at least from where I am in the Stephen King universe, how it's all connected quite yet.
Yeah. It's like you pick up bits and pieces as you go on. It's a lot of people, I think most people don't even know that Stephen King has an interconnected universe. They just kind of look at it like, oh, he has a bunch of different books.
I've been saying for a few years now that he made the MCU before the MCU for horror.
Yeah.
And I'm just waiting for some more people to realize that. My biggest unpopular Stephen King opinion, though, and I think I'm officially willing to say this on the record, my favorite book by him so far, though, is 11/22/63. I love that.
Yeah.
And it's such a different book from what he typically does. Like Pet Sematary and 11/22/63 are quite different. But I loved it regardless. And I will say it is a better book, but because of a few certain things, I did not enjoy it as much.
Yeah. There's some. We don't have to get into it, but there's some weird stuff going on in it, just to say the least. There is, because Stephen King.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's fine. Yeah, Stephen King goes places, and he likes to make you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, that's just what he does.
It's so infamous that every single person who's read it, you can just say that scene, and they'll go, "Yep."
They know what you're talking about. Yep. Yeah, because it's like I struggled even before this movie came out. I know I struggled. I'm like, I would discuss it with my friends, like, why do you think Stephen King did this? And it's like I came to terms with it, and I have like my own like internal explanation for why it needs to happen. But at the same time, I'm just kind of like, this maybe could have been cut.
Well, I feel like I have to ask you because I'm curious, and as someone I've been binging your channel recently, who's become a big fan. So, what series, now that Game of Thrones is over, are you most looking forward to? You have the Dune movies, that doesn't count. It's got to be a series, something that'll be ongoing. Of the upcoming TV shows, which one has piqued your interest the most?
None
of them is an acceptable answer.
See, that's the thing. I'm not like a big TV person as much as like books. Mm-hmm. But out of everything, let's go with, what are my options here? Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time.
The ones I wrote down here are, granted, there's 90 plus, so if there's a book you're thinking of, it's probably on the list. Yeah. But you got Witcher, Wheel of Time, Kingkiller, His Dark Materials, King Arthur, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones prequels, Dune, Conan. Let me think. You also have Gentlemen Bastards. You have The Dark Tower again. We have, it's endless, man. If you could think of a book, it's happening.
The Dark Tower. Like, I feel like they should just stop trying to adapt it. But let's go with Kingkiller Chronicles. And then, dang it, I forgot something. Read the first six one again.
Witcher, Wheel of Time, His Dark Materials, King Arthur, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings. Okay.
If they did King Arthur, I would want to see maybe kind of a Marion Zimmer Bradley kind of take on King Arthur, where it's more like the female perspective, and it's more like more like more from the perspective of like the women of Avalon. I'd like to see something like that because I don't want to just. I feel like the basic King Arthur story has just been done to death. Like, give me something different.
Yeah.
And I love the way that Morgan Le Fay is portrayed in that book. It's just like she's such a misunderstood character, and I just really like that take on it. That can
Okay.
be done really well.
Yeah, King Arthur has definitely been done to death. That horse is dead, rotted, and beaten again. There was that recent like rock movie adaptation with the guy from Sons of Anarchy. That was King Arthur. Like that, it's been done. But I agree, a new, fresh take like that would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they've tried to do Mist of Avalon before, but it was like some horrible, like early 90s abomination miniseries.
I love bad movies and bad TV shows, and
Oh,
so
yeah.
watching like fantasy stuff from the 80s and 90s is spectacular because it's always like whoever decided Sean Connery should be in Highlander and then not cast him as the Italian character. Yeah, whatever they did there, that's so bad. It's amazing. Like it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I mean, if Game of Thrones has done anything, and Lord of the Rings too, it's like it's boosted the respect that people have for the genre. It's like, oh, this can be done in a way that's like not hokey,
Mhm.
and that's not like totally disrespectful to the people that are watching it. Because I feel like a lot of like that earlier stuff is just like, oh, it's just like hokey fantasy. Deal
Yeah.
with it.
Well, I think my top three are the live action Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know why, but that one has really piqued my interest. I'm curious about
I
it.
didn't even know they were doing that.
Yeah, Netflix bought it, and the only reason I'm actually really hopeful is the original creators of Avatar: Last Airbender have been brought in and put in charge. So
That's fantastic.
yeah,
That's absolutely fantastic.
that's great. And so that's caused me to go back and start watching the anime, and I've been liking it quite a bit. It's cute, it's fun, and it's surprisingly deeper than I thought it would be. So I've been liking that. His Dark Materials has James McAvoy, and I love that man so much.
He
So
actually plays a character in the sci-fi Dune miniseries. He's actually Leto the Second.
really,
Yes, and he's fantastic. The best part of that miniseries.
I have to check that out. But I think my top two are still Witcher and Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time because obviously, duh, it's me. And then Witcher is just if there's Netflix, I have a feeling it'll be a knock it out of the park for Netflix with how much, especially they've been marketing it and really pushing it. And they renewed it for a second season already.
It's not even out yet.
It's a bit aggressive, but okay.
Are you a fan of the books more? Have you played the game? Or
I just did a top 10 list for fantasy series, and I put Witcher at number 2. Granted, that'll shift all the time. Like, that whole list fluctuates with however I'm feeling. But I really love those books. I think the author's kind of a tool, but I think those books are great.
I know he said something about like he hated the game or something because it was taking like his thunder or something. I don't know what it was, but like I've wanted to read the books for a while. People have been recommending them to me because I love the game. But it's just like, I'm not even a video game person, but that video game felt like reading a book and then sometimes you play a video game in between because that's how rich the lore is.
Yeah. The same people who made that game are making a game called Cyberpunk 20 something.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks great. But the books, I mean, I don't mean to step on anyone's turf, but I think it'd be a wonderful new lore for you to dive into because the lore is rich and the characters are wonderful. And the author does something that I keep yelling at more authors to do, which is actually develop friendships. Don't just say, hey, these people are friends and never do anything with it and only focus on romance, but actually show that these friends have chemistry and history and all this, which I love. That's why I love Gentleman Bastards so much.
For sure.
All right. Well, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate having you.
No problem. Anytime. I love having a chat about some fantasy stuff. It's always fun.
All right.
And it was really great meeting you at JordanCon too.
Yeah. That was a fun panel to be on. Brent Weeks seemed like a nice guy.
Yeah, everyone was really great.
All right. Well, if you have not already, go check out Ideas of Ice and Fire. Not only does he have some of the best Game of Thrones videos on all of YouTube, but general fantasy and some sci-fi as well, which plays right into my heart, and I'm enjoying it. So go check him out. Like and subscribe to this channel as well if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and go check out the other fantasy chats we've done with Murphy Napier, the booktuber, and Josh Boone, the director.